Okay, so here are the Denso Spark Plugs that I've removed, and these have about 102,000 miles on them. They're rated for 105,000 according to my manual, and it appears they were possibly leaking a little bit at the stem there. I checked the gaps on all of them. Only one of them failed the gap test. All of them are right on gap. They are a little carburized and could use a cleanup. But as far as them needing to be changed, the only real reason I would see that they would need change is because they appear to be leaking at the stem slightly, just by the direction of those frays. The camera isn't picking it up so good, but they've got a real fine tail end to them that leads me to believe that's from outward pressure. I could be wrong. One of the spark plugs failed the gap test, and it is smaller than the rated gap. The .040 gap tool will not fit on this spark plug. This was cylinder number 2, and it was the only cylinder that has oil residue on it. I believe I have a valve cover gasket leaking or something there, or head gasket maybe, I'm not sure which one, but this gap was small, and what that means is this plug would have been firing prematurely, because the way this goes, if your gap is too small, the plug will fire before the high tension reaches its peak. The larger the gap, the more voltage is needed to jump that gap. So if you have a smaller gap than rated and the computer fires one of the coil packs, the spark will be induced before the coil pack reaches its maximum voltage, because the dielectric breakdown is less. If your gap is too large, you will have a delayed detonation. I would assume that pre-ignition is probably harder on efficiency than the two, because that would probably cause a little bit of a knock. The delayed ignition would also cause an inefficiency, but I wouldn't say that would be nearly as bad. So when it comes to performance and all that, you definitely want your spark plugs gapped perfectly, because they directly affect the timing of your system, the way these things work. So just a thought, if you've ever wondered why a spark plug has to be gapped, that's it. It's because the voltage spike in the electrical ignition system is not a square wave. It is a crescent, and at the very peak of the crescent, the highest voltage in the coil pack is when the spark is supposed to initiate. However, if you, as I said, have a smaller gap, the voltage required to jump that gap, or the dielectric strength as it's called, is reduced, which will throw the timing of your ignition system off. I don't know how badly these things were leaking. They were obviously leaking. Something's going on there. So that could be the main reason behind the requirement. That could also just be a little bit of oil, but I doubt it. The way the coil packs shroud this, I think that was almost covered. That could just be some oil that leaked down on there, but I don't know. It appears to me it's leaking pressure. So I could have been suffering a pressure loss or compression loss. So there it is. I just thought you guys, some of you might want to see what a set of plugs with 102,000 miles on it looks like. Now, I have completely burnt the anode off of plugs like this before. The anode, that's not the cathode, I believe, is that little pin inside of there. So my bad. I believe this is the anode and this is the cathode. I could be wrong, but the cathode, that's the one that I have literally burnt that little peak of metal off of there on my G6, and the engine still ran fine, and there was no noticeable change when I changed the plugs that day. I didn't get better gas mileage, I didn't get more foot in the pedal, none of that. So There it is. That's the Denso spark plugs for the Pontiac, or the Infiniti G37 Journey. These are the FX E24HR11s, the Iridiums, and they are rated for 100,000 miles. It was fairly easy to change these plugs. The one plug on the driver's side, the rear driver's side plug, was the hardest because the wiring harness is all taped up and you can nearly damage the wires by pulling on the coil pack and all that. But other than that, it wasn't as brutal as I thought. You do have to remove the throttle bodies to do this, and my car has 2 throttle bodies, which is great for performance, but really kind of sucks for working on the car. My car is still vibrating at idle at stoplights. I apparently have a bad engine mount. I'm going to be looking into that tonight. So there you have it, the Denso spark plugs. I don't know if these are just made in Japan and that's why they require these plugs, or recommend, as they say. I've always been kind of an NGK guy since the days of my go-kart days, you know. I mean, I've just always considered NGK a manufacturer geared towards performance, but I'm not necessarily an engineer that would know anything about that stuff. So there's a bunch of stuff about low heat spark plugs and high heat and copper and all this other jazz, and I don't know enough details, and I don't want to send anyone astray. So don't go putting NGK spark plugs in your car unless you read through some forums and find out, because it could tamper with your timing in ways you didn't expect. I use this torque wrench here. This is a click torque wrench, and I torqued all my plugs at 18 foot-pounds, which isn't very tight in my opinion. I'm kind of concerned about that specification. 18 foot-pounds is like, I can damn near tighten that with my hand. So I'm exaggerating, of course, but that is extremely loose, and I don't know why. It's aluminum engine block, I get that, but I've got quite a few threads here, so I don't know. There you have it. Hopefully this information is useful to someone who's planning on changing their plugs and you want to know where your plugs are at a particular mileage. They probably could have went another 20,000 miles in my opinion, because as I said, I have driven a pair of Iridiums until that little cathode was burnt completely off of there, and the car still ran just fine. It had no problems out of my G6 Pontiac. So there you have it. I'm going to shut up now. What we're looking at here is a Denso FX E24 HR11 spark plug for a Infiniti 2008 G37 Journey. This car has about 101,000 miles on it. The specifications require a spark plug replacement at 105,000 miles, but I believe that's a little steep in my opinion. So this is what the new plugs are looking like. See if I can get a focus on that. Now I gotta say, iPhones are pretty crappy cameras in my opinion. So that's what a good one looks like. This is gapped at 0.041. The nominal size is 0.040, or 40 thousandths of an inch, which I believe is, what is that in millimeters? Like it's 1.1 or 0.1 or something. 1.01 millimeters. And I've checked all these. I'm going to be using this some kind of copper, high temperature copper formula. I hope this isn't colloidal copper. You have to be careful. It doesn't have the ingredients, unfortunately. If this has colloidal copper in it, it will give you a false reading on the torque wrench. Molybdenum disulfide, man, I can't talk, will also do the same thing, or any type of molybdenum lubricants.